I said, what are we going to have for breakfast this morning? He said, fried peanut butter and banana sandwich. And looked at him. I said, what? He said, fried peanut butter and banana sandwich.
It was past midnight in Memphis, the kind of August night where the heat doesn't break, it just shifts, pressing down on everything like a hand that refuses to let go. Inside Graceland, the lights in the main house were still on. They usually were. Elvis Presley rarely slept before the sun came up, and the people who worked for him had long since adjusted their lives to match the rhythm of his insomnia. But something about the night of August 15th, 1977, felt different to the woman standing in that kitchen. It felt heavy in a way she couldn't name and wouldn't forget. Mary Jenkins Langston had been cooking for Elvis since 1963. 14 years. 14 years of biscuits made from scratch before noon, of banana pudding prepared exactly the way his mother Gladys used to make it, of knowing, without being told, that when he asked for cornbread and black-eyed peas, he wasn't hungry. He was homesick for something he couldn't get back. She had fed this man through marriages and divorces, through comeback tours and canceled shows, through the years when he was the most famous person on the planet, and through the years when the weight of that fame had quietly begun to bury him alive. She knew his appetite the way a doctor knows a patient's chart, not just what he consumed, but what it meant. And on the night of August 15th, what it meant frightened her. The request came through the way requests at Graceland often did in those final years. Not directly, not from Elvis himself, but passed down through the layered, insular network of associates, assistants, and hangers-on that surrounded him at all times. A rotating cast of men who called themselves his friends, but whose presence, Mary had noticed over the years, seemed to grow more suffocating the worse things got. The message was simple: food sent up as soon as possible. Ice cream, cookies, something easy, something sweet. Mary made it without question. That was her job, and beyond the job, it was her devotion. She had never been the type to insert herself into the drama that perpetually swirled through that house. She cooked, she cared, she stayed in her lane. But her lane ran right through the heart of that kitchen, and from the heart of that kitchen, you could feel the pulse of everything happening above you. And that night, the pulse was wrong. What most people don't understand about Mary Jenkins Langston is how central she actually was to Elvis's daily emotional world. Not because she sought that position, but because food, real food, the kind made with muscle memory and love, is one of the most intimate things one human being can offer another. Elvis's relationship with food was not casual. It was desperate. It was the thing he reached for when the world got too loud, when the performance mask got too heavy, when the prescription bottles on his nightstand started to feel more like furniture than medicine. Mary understood this without needing it explained. She had watched the progression happen slowly, the way a tide comes in, so gradual that you don't notice how deep the water is until you're already past your knees. By 1977, she was past her knees. They all were. The people who were paying attention, anyway. The food went up that night. The kitchen went quiet. Mary cleaned up the way she always did, methodical and unhurried, because there was a dignity in that work that she refused to let the circumstances strip away. And then she waited, not consciously, not standing at attention, but in the way that people wait when something in them knows the night isn't finished yet. When something in the body refuses to fully relax because the body understands things the mind hasn't caught up to. She would later say, in one of the rare moments she allowed herself to speak about that night, that she stood at the kitchen window for a long time before she went home. That she looked out at the grounds, the manicured lawns, the gates, The world Elvis had built around himself like a fortress and a prison all at once, and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a word for. Not fear, exactly. Not grief, because grief requires a loss that's already happened. Something closer to inevitability. The recognition of an ending that had been written long before anyone was willing to read it. "I knew when I sent that food up," she said. "I just knew." And then she stopped talking about it for 30 years. That is the sentence that should stop you. Not the drama, not the details, not the names and the dates, and the documented dysfunction of the final months inside Graceland. That sentence, because it tells you everything about what the next 50 years of silence actually cost. Mary Jenkins Langston was not a woman without courage. She was a woman without protection. And in the world she lived in, working class, black Southern, employed by one of the most powerful entertainment empires in American history, courage and protection were not the same thing. They never had been. She knew. She always knew. And the story of what she knew and what she heard that night and what she chose to carry alone for half a century, that story has never been told the way it deserves to be told. Until now. To understand what Mary saw on that final night, you first have to understand what normal looked like. Because the tragedy of Elvis Presley's last years isn't just that things went wrong, it's that they went wrong so slowly, so incrementally, that the people closest to him lost the ability to see it clearly. Familiarity has a way of doing that. It smooths the edges of deterioration until what should be alarming starts to feel routine. But Mary Jenkins never lost that clarity. And the reason she never lost it is because she was watching through a lens that nobody else in that house was using. She was watching through food. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. 14 years is a long time to cook for someone. Long enough to stop being an employee and become, in some unspoken and uncelebrated way, a keeper of that person's most private self. Mary didn't manage Elvis's career or his finances or his public image. She didn't negotiate contracts or book venues or handle the endless machinery of his fame. She fed him. And in feeding him, she learned something about him that the people controlling every other aspect of his life never bothered to understand. She learned what made him feel safe. When Elvis was genuinely happy, he wanted his mother's food. That was always the tell. Gladys Presley had died in 1958 when Elvis was just 23 years old, and the wound that loss left never fully closed. It shaped everything. His relationship with women, his relationship with home, his relationship with the kind of comfort that money could approximate but never truly buy. When things were good, when a tour had gone well, or the music felt right, or the world felt manageable, Elvis would come down to the kitchen and ask Mary for the things Gladys used to make. Pork chops fried in a cast iron skillet, cornbread with a crisp edge, mashed potatoes with enough butter to make a cardiologist wince. Those meals meant he was connected to something real, something that existed before the fame and the pressure and the impossible weight of being Elvis Presley. But when things were hard, the requests changed, and by the mid-1970s, hard had become the default setting. The comfort food became something else entirely, no longer a nostalgic reach toward happier times, but a compulsive, almost frantic attempt to fill something that food was never going to fill. The orders came later and later into the night. The portions grew. The requests repeated with an urgency that had nothing to do with hunger in any physical sense. Mary recognized the difference because she had watched the shift happen in real time, year by year, slowly enough to break your heart precisely because of how gradual it was. She wasn't a psychiatrist. She didn't have clinical language for what she was observing. What she had was 14 years of context, and 14 years of context told her that the man upstairs was disappearing into something, and the food was just the most visible symptom of a much deeper collapse. What made Mary's position so singular and so quietly devastating was that she existed in a part of Elvis's world that the inner circle didn't fully control. The Memphis Mafia, as they were famously known, were everywhere. They traveled with him, lived with him, managed access to him with the territorial intensity of people who understood that their proximity to Elvis was the source of their entire identity. They shaped his schedule, filtered his relationships, and created around him a bubble so airtight that genuine outside perspective became nearly impossible to penetrate. But the kitchen was Mary's domain, and Elvis came to the kitchen, or sent word to the kitchen, in moments when he wasn't performing for anyone, not the press, not the fans, not even the men who called themselves his closest friends. In those moments, the mask came off. Not dramatically, not in the way of confessions or confrontations, but in the small, unguarded way that people reveal themselves when they're simply hungry and tired and not thinking about who's watching. Mary saw him in those moments more consistently than almost anyone, and what she saw, particularly in the final 2 years of his life, was a man who was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. A man whose body had become a battleground between the demands of his public persona and the private reality of his deteriorating health, between the mythology the world had built around him and the fragile, deeply human person who still existed somewhere underneath it. The prescription medication was not a secret inside Graceland. That needs to be said plainly, because the myth that nobody knew is exactly that, a myth constructed after the fact by people who needed to protect themselves from the more uncomfortable truth. People knew, staff knew, members of the inner circle knew, Mary knew, not because anyone told her, but because you cannot cook for someone for 14 years without understanding the rhythms of their body, and by 1977 those rhythms were telling a story that was impossible to ignore if you were actually willing to look. And that's the thing. Most people around Elvis, for reasons ranging from genuine affection to financial dependency to simple self-preservation, had stopped truly looking. It was easier not to. Easier to take the salary and keep the peace and tell yourself that tomorrow things would be better, that the next tour would turn it around, that Elvis was Elvis and Elvis was invincible. Mary never stopped looking, which is exactly why by the summer of 1977, she had started keeping track. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she had any plan for what to do with what she was recording, but because something in her, the part that had cared for this man through 14 years of midnight meals and quiet mornings and all the unwitnessed moments in between, needed to acknowledge that what was happening was real, that it mattered, that someone, somewhere in that house, was paying attention. She was keeping track, and what she wrote down in those final months would have told anyone willing to read it exactly where things were heading. Nobody ever asked to read it. We're back in August 15th, 1977. But this time, you know what you're looking at. You know who Mary is. You know what 14 years of watching and cooking and caring actually means. You know that when she says something felt wrong that night, she isn't speaking casually. She is speaking as someone who had spent over a decade developing an almost clinical sensitivity to the rhythms of that house, that man, that world. So when we return to the kitchen on that final night, the details don't land the same way they did before. They land harder. because now you understand the weight behind them. The food request that came down on the night of August 15th was unusual in a way that Mary struggled to articulate but never forgot. It wasn't what was asked for: the ice cream, the cookies, the simple comfort food that had become a kind of signature in those final months. It was the way the request arrived: rushed, clipped, delivered not with the casual familiarity that usually characterized communication between the inner circle and the kitchen staff, but with an undercurrent of something that Mary would later describe as urgency wrapped in deliberate casualness. Like someone trying very hard to sound like nothing was wrong and failing in the small, involuntary ways that people always fail when they're performing normalcy under pressure. She prepared the food. She always prepared the food. That was the covenant she had maintained for 14 years. Show up, do the work, feed the man, ask nothing in return except the quiet dignity of being trusted with something real. She sent it up through the channels that food always traveled in that house, and she began the process of cleaning the kitchen, which was her ritual, her way of closing out the night. But the kitchen at Graceland was not an isolated room. Sound traveled in that house the way secrets travel in close communities, not loudly, not intentionally, but persistently, finding the cracks and moving through them whether anyone wanted it to or not. And through those cracks, Mary heard something she was never meant to hear. She has never given a fully detailed account of exactly what was said, and that restraint itself is telling. The people who knew Mary in her later years, the journalists who earned enough of her trust to sit with her, the oral historians who recorded her recollections before she passed in 2000, have described a woman who chose her words with extraordinary care, not because she was hiding anything, but because she understood the difference between what she knew and what she could prove. And she refused to collapse that distinction for the sake of a dramatic story. What she would say, consistently, across multiple accounts, was this: she heard voices she recognized. She heard a conversation about Elvis's condition that was framed not as a crisis requiring immediate action, but as a situation requiring management. Careful, deliberate, strategic management. Let that settle for a moment. Not panic, not the urgent scramble of people trying to save someone they loved. Management. She heard people she knew, people who ate at that table, people who cashed checks with Elvis Presley's name on them, people who had built their entire lives around their proximity to this man, discussing his deteriorating state in terms that were more concerned with consequences than with the person himself. What would happen publicly, how things would look, what needed to be controlled. The conversation she overheard was not the conversation of a support system rallying around someone in crisis. It was the conversation of people already calculating the distance between themselves and the fallout. Mary did not storm into the room. She did not confront anyone or demand answers or make herself visible in that moment, because she understood something that the people in that conversation apparently did not: that the loudest act of witness is sometimes the quietest. She stood in that kitchen. She finished what she was doing. She let the sounds of that conversation pass through her and settle somewhere deep and permanent, the way certain things do when you know on an instinctive level that you are living through something that cannot be undone. Now, it would be easy at this point to flatten this into a conspiracy, to take Mary's account and stretch it into something more sensational than it actually is. But that would be a betrayal of what makes her testimony genuinely important. The truth she witnessed was not the truth of a plot or a crime in the dramatic, cinematic sense. It was something more common, and therefore more devastating. It was the truth of institutional failure. of the specific way that systems built around powerful people tend to prioritize the continuation of that power over the well-being of the person at the center of it. Elvis Presley did not die because nobody cared about him. He died, in part, because the structure surrounding him had long since reorganized itself around sustaining his career rather than protecting his life. And the people with the most access, the people in those rooms having those conversations, had been inside that structure long enough to mistake it for love. Mary had never made that mistake. Love to her looked like a plate of food made with attention and care and sent up a staircase at midnight. It looked like 14 years of showing up. It looked like noticing when something was wrong and carrying that knowledge even when there was nowhere safe to put it. She went home before sunrise. She sat in her own kitchen, a smaller one, a quieter one that held none of the mythology of Greslan, but all of the same grief, and she wept until the morning came. And when the morning came, so did the news that Elvis Presley was gone. She never spoke publicly about what she had heard that night, not to the press that descended on Memphis like a storm, not to the investigators, not to the biographers who spent the following decades reconstructing the final hours. She carried it the way women like Mary Jenkins Langston have always been required to carry the things they witness in the houses of powerful people, silently, privately, at enormous personal cost. Most of the people in that conversation are dead now, and Mary is gone too, but the record she left behind, fragmented, careful, and devastatingly honest, did not disappear with her. The question that has followed this story from the beginning is deceptively simple. Why now? After 50 years of silence, after decades of biographers and documentarians and investigative journalists circling Grand's history like satellites that never quite achieved orbit, why is Mary Jenkins Langston's account only now being pieced together into something coherent enough to change the conversation? The answer requires honesty about something uncomfortable. The silence didn't break because the world finally asked the right questions. It broke because the world finally ran out of the people who had the most to lose from the answers. Mary passed away in 2000. She did not live to see the full excavation of her testimony. But she did not leave the world empty-handed either. In the final years of her life, she spoke, not to tabloids, not to television cameras hungry for sensation, but to the quieter, more patient corners of historical documentation. Oral history projects, researchers who came not with an agenda, but with a recorder and the willingness to listen without interrupting. Journalists who had earned enough of her trust to sit across from her and let her speak at her own pace, in her own words, without the distorting pressure of a headline waiting to be written. What she left behind exists in fragments, recorded conversations, secondhand accounts from people she confided in, documented interviews that sat in archives for years before anyone thought to cross-reference them against the broader historical record of Elvis's final months. That cross-referencing has been happening quietly for the better part of a decade, and what it reveals is not a new story so much as a completed one. Mary's account doesn't exist in isolation. It corroborates, with striking precision, the accounts of doctors who raised concerns that were ignored, of staff members who noticed the same patterns she noticed and made the same calculations she made about the cost of speaking up, of biographers who spent years trying to articulate the specific nature of the failure that surrounded Elvis in his final years without quite being able to name the human face of it. Mary's testimony gives that failure a human face. It puts a person in a kitchen at midnight, hearing something no one was supposed to hear, and it asks us to sit with the full weight of what that means. What it means, first and most plainly, is that the people responsible for Elvis's care knew more than they ever admitted publicly. This is not a radical claim at this point. It has been documented, argued, and largely accepted by serious Elvis historians for years. What Mary's account adds is texture. It adds the granular, specific, deeply human detail that transforms an abstract institutional failure into something you can feel in your chest. Because it is one thing to read in a biography that the system around Elvis prioritized his career over his health. It is another thing entirely to hear about a woman standing in a kitchen at midnight, listening through the walls, understanding in real time that the people upstairs were already in crisis management mode while the man they were managing was still alive. There is also a dimension of this story that deserves to be spoken plainly because it has been consistently underexamined in mainstream Elvis discourse. Mary Jenkins Langston was a black woman working in a white household in the American South in the 1970s. The power dynamics of that reality are not incidental to her story, they are central to it. The reason her voice was never sought out, never amplified, never treated as a primary source in the way that the voices of the Memphis Mafia were treated, is not simply because she was kitchen staff. It is because the architecture of whose testimony gets recorded, whose account gets believed, and whose silence gets respected rather than investigated, has never been neutral. Mary understood this. It informed every decision she made about when to speak and when to stay quiet, about how much to say and to whom. Her restraint was not timidity. It was the calculated self-preservation of a woman who had spent her entire life navigating a world that did not extend to people like her the same protections it extended to everyone else in that house. And yet she stayed. For 14 years she stayed. She made the biscuits and the banana pudding and the midnight comfort food, and she showed up every day in that kitchen because somewhere underneath all of it was a genuine human connection that defied the power imbalance it existed within. She cared about Elvis Presley the person, not the icon. And that distinction, that insistence on seeing the man rather than the myth, is precisely what made her account so valuable, and precisely what made it so easy for the machinery of Graceland's legacy to overlook. What changes when we finally listen to her? Not the facts of Elvis's death, not the cause, not the timeline, not the clinical record of what happened on August 16, 1977. What changes is the moral landscape of the story. The question shifts from what happened to who was watching and what did they do with what they saw. And the answer to that question, delivered through the quiet, careful, enormously costly testimony of a woman who spent 50 years carrying something alone, is both simple and unbearable. The one person who was truly watching was the one person nobody thought to ask. The one person who noticed, who felt the shift in that house, who sent food up a staircase at midnight with the knowledge already sitting heavy in her chest. She was the woman in the kitchen. The woman with no publicist and no platform and no protection. The woman who made him feel, in the most human and irreplaceable way, that someone in that enormous, gilded, suffocating house genuinely cared whether he was okay. The last meal was never really about the food. It was about who was paying attention. And the one person who was, the one person who noticed, who felt it, who knew, was the one person nobody ever asked. Until now. If this story is sitting with you the way it's sitting with me, you're not alone. Drop what you think in the comments, because this conversation is far from over. And if you want to keep going deeper into the stories that don't have clean endings, subscribe. The next one will find you.